So if you remember nothing else from today, I want you to remember these 3 words. People aren't objects. If people are objects, influencing people would be a physics problem. But people aren't objects. So we got to treat them like people. Well, what does it mean to treat people like people? Well, one is to empower people. It's an incredible honor and privilege to be here today to talk about what it is that makes us inspiring. And I'm going to tell you about 2 stories of 2 very similar people at one level. They're both commanders of vessels that suddenly and abruptly had gaping holes in those vessels. I want to tell you about each one of these people responded, and it tells us something fundamental about how we may affect people, impact people in the world, and either inspire or infuriate them. The first is a woman named Tammy Jo Schultz. She was captain of Southwest Flights 1380, flying from New York's LaGuardia to Dallas, Texas, when partway through the flight, within the first hour, the left engine exploded and tore a hole in the side of this plane. A passenger was sucked into that hole and fatally lost their life. And now she was dealing with a crisis. Not of her making, unscripted. Hydraulic lines were cut, fluid lines were cut. She was dealing with a crippled plane. And she listened to the plane, and she realized that the plane needed to or wanted to descend. So she put the plane into a gradual descent in order to stabilize it. But at that moment, she did something that is so critical and so remarkable. She also recognized that not only was she the captain of this vessel, trying to steer this crippled plane to safety, but she was also a protector of her passengers, not only of their physical health, but also of their psychological state. And she took the perspective of these passengers and recognized, what would the experience be like for a passenger staring at a hole in their plane that was suddenly descending? And so she went on the intercom and said 10 words. And those 10 words transformed people from the edge of a heart attack to a sense of relief, possibility, and hope. And those 10 words were this: we are not going down, we're going to Philly. And people talked about how remarkable those 10 words were for changing. They were still scared, they were still freaked out, but they weren't quite hyperventilating as much. Now, if you listen, we don't have time, unfortunately, in this case, to listen to Tammy Jo with air traffic controller, but she sounds like she's ordering lunch from a New York deli. It's I'll take rye with, just saying, okay, we're going here. Tell me what you want me to do next. And when the EMTs got to her, they asked a question that was surprising to her. They said, how did you get through security? She's like, what? And it's like, how did your nerves of steel not set off all the alarms? You show no indication of physiological arousal. Your body is completely calm. And then before she left the airplane, she went row by row, and she looked every passenger in the eye to make sure that they were okay. And people talked about that for weeks after. And she even said afterwards, she said, I find it remarkable that more people have talked about the stroll down the aisleway after the plane had been successfully landed than what it took to land this crippled plane. And so we can start to see that she gave all of her passengers an optimistic why for what was happening, this context of descent. She was calm throughout the process, and the passengers could hear that calmness in her voice. And then she took the time to make a connection with each and every passenger to make sure they were okay. So let me tell you about another man, another captain, a guy named Francesco Centino, who was captain of the Costa Concordia. Now, he took a normal course of events and turned it into a crisis by getting too close to shore. He claims it was to salute the mariners on shore. Prosecutors claim that he was trying to impress his mistress, a Moldovan dancer who was on shore. What is not in dispute is that he got so close to shore, 150-foot hole was put into his vessel. Now, what happened next is also remarkable, because what happened next was nothing. He didn't call the Coast Guard for an hour. And when he finally called them, he dithered for 20 minutes before telling them what was up. What did he do for that hour? He was trying to get his story straight. He was trying to say the electrical blackout, which was caused by the hole, caused the hole instead. And he was coming with, who could he blame it on? The helmsman, for example. And if you hear him talking to the Coast Guard, you will hear abject infuriation in their voice. Because where was Captain Schettino when they were talking to him? He was in a lifeboat. Now you may ask, how did Captain Schettino end up in a lifeboat? He claims he tripped and accidentally fell into the lifeboat. What's even more remarkable is prior to that, he also tripped and somehow tripped and his captain's uniform came off and his civilian clothing came on. So he was actually sitting in the lifeboat pretending to be a civilian. Now, Captain Schettino was, the last words of the Coast Guard is, I'm going to make you pay for this. Over 100 people passed away. All of them would have survived if he had acted quickly and expeditiously. And he did pay. He spent more than 10 years in prisons for manslaughter, dereliction of duties, etc. But what we can see is that these two people really represent two opposing figures in the world. Those that inspire us and those that infuriate us. So I want you to think for just the example of a Schettino in your life. That person that inspired you, they changed you inside. They created what I call a wellspring of hope and possibility. Exactly what she gave her passengers with, we're not going down, we're going to Philly. Now I want you to think, a Schultz in your life, I got that backwards. Now I want you to think about a Schettino in your life, someone that just created what I call, right, this seething cauldron of rage and resentment, right? Makes your blood boil. And I've asked tens of thousands of people across the globe this question, and I've analyzed their responses, and I've said to them, tell me, what was it about this person? And I've come up with 4 big ideas I'm going to share with you today. Here's the biggest idea of all, which is that inspiring and infuriating leaders exist on an enduring continuum that is made up of 3 universal factors. Now let me unpack that for you. First is the continuum. Inspiring and infuriating. What do I mean by that? Well, when you ask people around the world, tell me about an inspiring leader, the characteristics they give are mirror images of each other. Inspiring leaders are optimistic. They see the big picture. Infuriating leaders are pessimistic pedantics, focused on irrelevant details like Schettino was. Inspiring leaders are calm, courageous protectors, right? Infuriating leaders are anxious cowards. Inspiring leaders are generous to others. They elevate others, right? Infuriating leaders are selfish, focused on themselves. They diminish others. So we can see that there's this mirror image here. Now, the second big part of that sentence I just gave you is the word universal. So I've asked this of tens of thousands of people across the globe on every continent in the world, even the penguins that Donald Trump's trying to put tariffs on. And what I've discovered is that there's not a single inspiring attribute that's mentioned in one country that's not mentioned in every country. It literally meets the definition of universality. Our brains are wired to evaluate our leaders along this continuum. And then the third big idea is that there are 3 universal factors. And I call these visionary, how we see the world, exemplar, how we are in the world, and mentor, how we interact in the world. And I essentially told you those with Schettino. Her vision, right? Optimistic why? We're not going down, we're going to Philly. Her exemplary calmness and courage in that moment. And then her mentorship as she strolled down the aisle and looked each person in the eye. And because this is a marketing conference, I'm going to give you a little marketing mnemonic device to remember this. I like to call this the Venn diagram of inspiring leadership to help this. Now, the second big idea is that why are these the 3 universal factors of inspiring versus infuriating others? It's because each one satisfies a fundamental human need. So being visionary satisfies a fundamental human need for meaning and understanding. Being an exemplar satisfies a fundamental human need for protection, safety, and passion and energy. And being an inspiring leader involves being a mentor because it satisfies a human need for belonging and status. So what I want to do right now is I want to go through sort of each of these individually one by one. I want to start by talking about visionary, and I'm going to ask you a question. Raise your hand in this room if you have kids. So many of you have kids in this room, and all of us who have kids know that when you have a child, your life gets worse. You barely sleep, right? You rarely shower. You almost never, well, you probably really never have sex again. And your mind is a mess, your body's a mess, your house is a mess. And so here's a picture of my two little boys during April of 2020 during the pandemic, and you can see the little mess they're making. And so one of the questions that's bedeviled evolutionary psychologists and biologists is, why has our species not died off, right? Like, our lives get worse, it's so clear. And it turns out that when you talk to new parents and you ask them about what it's like to be a new parent, they use a similar word, a couple words, right? My life suddenly has a sense of meaning. It has a sense of purpose. You know, my brother described it as the fiercest love he could ever imagine. And so what evolutionary biologists have concluded is that it's not that we need to have kids in order to have this impulse towards meaning. It is just a condition of being human. Regardless of whether you have kids, we are preconditioned to crave a sense of meaning and understanding. And here's a picture of them a little bit older, and I have this great quote that I love from Nietzsche. People who have a why to live can bear anyhow, right? We can suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune if we know why we're doing it. So one of the things that being visionary does is provide us with this sense of meaning and understanding, and that's why it's so universal. Now, having a vision is so important. I have the word up there, understanding. I'm going to show you a great experiment by one of my advisors, Marcia Johnson. She was my advisor at Princeton University. She's now at Yale. She did this study when she was at Yale. And I've given this to thousands of people across the globe, and less than 5 people can sense figure it out. But I'm just going to give you this little scenario. So the procedure is actually quite simple. First, you arrange things in different groups. One pile may be sufficient, but you may have to go somewhere else, and that's to find, because you don't lack the facilities. But it's important not to overdo things, because you don't want things to break. But the procedure is completed. You arrange the materials back into their groups, and you put them back in their place. Now, if you ask people, I've done this with CEOs, people all over the world, and again, sometimes no one can figure this out. I'm not going to ask you to do it, but I'm going to tell you about a second condition in Marcia's experiment. This was condition 1. No title. Condition 2, she gave them a title. I want you to think about how everything changes when you get the title, how each sentence takes on meaning. Each sentence connects to the other sentence. It gives you this holistic vision. And the title is Doing the Laundry, right? Notice how every sentence makes sense now. Now, what's most interesting about this experiment is not that it was easier to read with the title, it's what happened next. Later, Marcia Johnson gave them a memory test. And the people who got the title, well, they didn't remember it word for word, but they got it. Now the people who didn't get the title, some of them were like, I don't even remember reading anything, right? Without the title, they couldn't make sense of their own experience. So we gotta have a vision for people in order to do that. But the second thing we need to do is we need to make that vision simple. And I call this the inception rule. And the inception rule is basically the idea that if you want to plant an idea in someone's dream, this is what he wants to do in the movie. It's not how deep you go, it's how simple you go. So it grows naturally in people's minds. A second thing that you want to do is you want to make it as vivid and visual as possible. So Drew Carton of Wharton has done an amazing experiment. In one of the conditions, they were designing a product, and he told the people, our mission is to make our customers satisfied. Simple, right? But here's the second condition. He said, our mission is to make our customers smile. It turns out that the people who got the smile, because it's visual, they could feel it, they could see it, produced more engaging products for their customers. And so we can start to see how this really matters. Now, one of the reasons why vision is so important is that it simplifies decision-making. How many in this room have ever heard of a company called Zoom? Right? So if you're like me, you had never heard of Zoom in the fall of March of 2020, and they went on board, and imagine Zoom, right? They're getting, they're, I don't know, 100,000 times, right, their normal customer bases. Everyone's going on. But you can see up there, they have actually a very simple message called delivering happiness. Now, it turned out this was critical for them, because one of the questions they had to get very early on was, how much functionality should we have in the base model that we give people? Too much functionality, people get overwhelmed. Too few, people can't do what they want to do. Because they were focused on delivering happiness, they worked very hard on getting the right balance of functionality, like Goldilocks. The second thing is one of the most infuriating things that any of us can experience in the world, and I've screamed into my phone in this situation, are long wait times for customer service help. And they realized that lots of people were going to be needing customer service help. And there's nothing more destroying of happiness than long wait times. So they hired tons and tons of customer service representatives to help people deal with their frantic, panic need to solve Zoom immediately. And it was actually great during the pandemic because lots of people working from home needed jobs suddenly, right? And so it worked out well. But so what an inspiring vision does is it simplifies decision-making. It helps us make strategically wise decisions. And then the final thing I'll say about being visionary is you got to repeat it again and again and again, right? Especially in times of crisis. Fear doesn't hear. We have to hear the idea again and again and again. Now, I've been part of a dozen legal cases involving damage to reputation, where I've sometimes been the sole expert witness saying why defamation was so damaging. And the core of my argument that's led to over $1 billion in settlements and verdicts is how damaging it is when that defamatory claim gets repeated again and again. So a big part of the analysis, how often did people hear this false claim, if you will? So what does it mean to be visionary? It's offering an optimistic, values-based vision that is simplified and repeated. Now let's go to exemplar. This is how we are in the world. And I'm going to show you two pictures of two different people that are actually doing the same thing. They are fighting for their country's independence. Bubalina of Greece and George Washington of the United States. But notice how similar these paintings are. What are they doing? They're standing up, right? They're taking on the most risk. Their boat's in the lead, right? They are being calm and courageous protectors. That's what we want in the world, is someone that protects us, right? Now, a second thing about being an exemplarizer behavior is kind of the opposite of calm. You might call it energetic. And so we don't have time to do this today, but if we had more time, I would each of you pair up and have one of you tell the other person about a passion of yours. And then I would ask the person that was listening, I would say, what did you notice about your partner when they talked about their passion? And it always follows the same 5 steps. They'll tell me their eyes lit up, they sparkled. They had a smile, a big, beaming smile. Oh, they spoke fast and with a higher pitch. They used their hands, right? They became like jazz hands. And they leaned in as if telling me a secret. And I say to them, well, what happened to you when you were describing their passion? They're like, my eyes lit up. I smiled. I reciprocated. I started to feel energy percolate inside of me. And I've shown this empirically. So we did a study with Dragon's Den, which is the Canadian equivalent of Shark's Tank. If someone was 1 standard deviation higher on passion, they were 40% more likely to get funding. But you have to remember that something else about passion. Passion is expressed in our eyes, in our mouth, in our throat, in our hands, and in our bodies. And all those things happen spontaneously and simultaneously. And so that tells us how hard it is to fake passion. Right? You have to say, okay, gotta get my eyes big. Okay, now I gotta smile. Wait, am I using my hands? And so authentic passion really matters, and it matters for this reason. Remember what I just said. They could feel that percolating inside of them. So you can't inspire others unless you are inspired. So it's important to tap into your own passion. Again, being exemplar is one of the 3 universal factors because it satisfies a core fundamental need for security, protection, and passion. Final thing about being exemplar is exemplify your vision. The most infuriating person of all is the hypocrite who says one thing but does another. So let's go to the third factor of what it means to be an inspiring leader, and that's being a mentor. So I'm going to give you a little physics problem. When you put force and pressure on an object, what direction does it go? This is my Dean Maglaris. He puts force and pressure on this object. It goes in that direction. You've seen I've won countless awards for my PowerPoint graphics. I think you can all tell. He just demonstrated Newton's first law of physics. But let's just change one word from this. From object to person. What happens when you put force and pressure on a person? What direction they go? Well, they push back, right? So he puts force and pressure on me, I push back. So if you remember nothing else from today, I want you to remember these three words. People aren't objects. People are objects. Influencing people would be a physics problem. But people aren't objects. So we got to treat them like people. Well, what does it mean to treat people like people? Well, one is to empower people. And I love this quote from Confucius. Tell me, and I will forget. Show me, and I may understand. But it's only when you truly involve me that I really understand. Sorry, tell me and I'll remember, right? But only when I understand, right? And so part of life is involving people, right? Getting people involved. We want our customers to feel involved and engaged, right? We want to feel them empowered. The second thing is to elevate others. And I've done a lot of research on this. This is another universal continuum. There's nothing more infuriating than thinking someone stole credit from you, right? And there's nothing more elevating or uplifting than feeling that someone recognized your contributions, right? And I'm going to come back to this at the very end. And then finally, inspiring leaders empathize with others. They exactly what Tammy Jo Schultz did as she walked down that aisle. Again, it's one of the three universal characteristics because it satisfies this need for belonging and status. Mentors empower others, they elevate others, right? They empathize with others. So I want to come back to this diagram, and I want to come to my third big idea, that inspiring leaders aren't just born, but they can be made. Here's the most important and powerful insight from my research, is that there is a universal, identifiable set of attributes that we can all practice. We can become more visionary by seeing that big picture, optimistic, value-based vision, simplifying it, visualizing it, repeating it. We can become more inspiring exemplar, right? By working on being calm in a crisis, protecting other people, expressing our passion. Or we can be a more inspiring mentor by giving people opportunities and responsibilities, empowering them, recognizing their contributions, and letting you know that you understand and care for them. So, the fact that there is a universal set, not of traits, but of attributes, behaviors. We inspire versus infuriate depending on what we do. Now, there's one problem. Problem is this. The world slants us towards the infuriating end of the continuum, right? We get tired. We get hungry. We get hangry. We have strong emotions like anger. Towards one person, we take it out on someone else. We find ourselves in uncertain situations that create stress. We feel pressure, time pressure, crisis pressure, high stakes pressure. This event really matters to me. And then we start going towards the infuriating end of the continuum. So I want you to remember two things about this. Here's the first one. None of us are perfect, right? You want to be accountable, but you want to be too hard on yourselves. You could be the most inspiring person today, and you may slip up tomorrow and be a little infuriating. And that's okay. And this is one thing my research shows, is shame is a destructive emotion. Shame makes us either ostriches that bury our heads in the sand and deny, don't want to look at this, think about it, or it makes us defensive monsters that say, it's you, right? And for those of you who have kids, you probably have had kids. So we have one of my kids has never done anything wrong in his life. It's always someone else's fault. It's remarkable. Like I sneezed 2 days ago and that led him to hit his brother today, But the point is, if we get people to not feel shame, you can accept your slip-ups, and then you can make a commitment to be better tomorrow. And here's the final big idea. Reap what you sow. In the Bible, there's a phrase, reap what you sow. And what it means is what we put out in the world comes back to us. And I've created a homonym of that, REIP, that begins like this. How do we reap what we sow? How do we put more inspiring energy out so we receive more inspiring energy back? We start with reflections. So we start with thinking about our own experiences. Thinking about when could we have been more inspiring, or when we were a little infuriating, or when did we do great and we could do more of that? And then we could think about exactly what I asked you to do earlier, is think about the inspiring people in your life. How could you emulate that person? R, right, is to reflect. E is to emulate. So then what we want to do is turn those reflections and emulations into intentions, right? Make a small commitment, something you're going to do tomorrow that will help you be more inspiring and less infuriating. Maybe it's meditation to make you calm. Maybe it's practicing seeing the big picture, right? Maybe it's taking a moment to empathize with others else. And then finally, turn those into a practice that you can do every day. Now, to help you on this process of reflection, I've created a Am I Inspiring scale at adamgalinsky.com that you can take, and it asks 18 questions, 3 minutes, and it'll give you a score of where you stand on these things. I think it's really, really important. But I want to end with one final story. And this is a story about president of a bank, 1,200 employees, and he sends a note to every single employee on their birthday every year. And he says, happy birthday, says something they've done well recently, and asks something about their life. So he's sending 4 or 5 of these a day, right? And he showed me one of them. Joseph Stigliano is his name. And it just said, hey, Mary, what a great job you did last week on that presentation. How was bowling this week? So he says it takes him about 10 minutes over his cup of coffee. And then he sent me her response back. It was a novel back. Oh my God, thank you so much. I worked so hard on that presentation. Oh, bowling was a disaster this weekend, And he said that, it fills him. And so I was telling the story, and then a CEO told me that he started to do this. Every morning over coffee, he would send one note to someone. And he said 2 things that I think are really interesting. The first thing he said was, I did it to help them. But it turns out it helps me. Because I send this note, and then they send me this gushing response back. And I did it to put a skip in their step, but it puts a skip in my step. The second thing he said, which I think was really interesting, was that it actually works better over email. We always tell people do things by person. If I compliment someone in person, they get embarrassed. They're like, stop it. He said, what I realized when I send these by text, they get to savor them. They get to read it later that night. They get to share it with their spouse, right? And I get this glowing thing back. So you can inspire others, but if you really, really, truly, truly want to be inspiring, the only way to do so, this is a marketing conference, is to buy my book. So, thank you so much.